Hi, everyone, and welcome. I can see all of our attendees coming through the floodgates, so I'm going to give it about a minute. Hi, it's nice to see so many people joining us today. While you all come into our Zoom room and enter, I'm going to kind of give a brief introduction to what we're going to talk about today. My name is Beth Spotswood-Daza. I'm Alta's digital editor, and thrilled to welcome you to today's Alta Live, a digital author interview series that we hoped would be a 2 or 3 week thing when the pandemic started, and we're going on nearly a year now. But it's wonderful to see, nearly 60 people here already is a thrill, and I'm so excited to welcome 2 authors today. We're going to do a kind of a twist. They're going to be in conversation with one another. So please let me introduce Roberto Lovato and Ben Ehrenreich. Roberto's latest book, Unforgetting, and Ben's Desert Notebooks excerpts are both featured in the current issue of Alta. So please do check out our winter reads section of that, and I will link to their excerpts coming up. Roberto is the author of Unforgetting, a memoir of family, migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas. He has won numerous awards, been on numerous lists. He's an educator, journalist, and a writer based in San Francisco. He's a member of the Writers Grotto, which is near and dear to Alta's hearts. And he's also, currently really involved in helping build a movement advocating for equity and literary justice for more than 60 million Latinx persons left off of bookshelves in the United States and out of the national dialogue. So I'm hoping he can touch on that today. Ben Ehrenreich writes about climate change for The Nation. His work has appeared in Harper's Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, the London Review of Books, and Los Angeles Magazine. In 2011, he was awarded a National Magazine Award. He is the author of 2 novels, Ether and the Suitors, as well as The Way to the Spring, Life and Death in Palestine, based on his reporting from the West Bank. And his latest, The Desert Notebooks, A Roadmap for the End of Time, was published last year. So these 2 are friends, brilliant authors, and I'm going to let them kind of be in conversation with each other, hopefully about their current works, Unforgetting and Desert Notebooks, as well as whatever else they want to talk about. Please do use the chat feature or the question button to ask any questions you have for Roberto or Ben. We're going to stop at about 12:55, 25 minutes from now, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. But I'm going to start, before I disappear, by asking you both, when did you first meet each other? Can you tell me your recollections of the first time you guys met? How do you know each other in real life?
I don't know the first time we met. Go ahead.
You're younger, man. Go ahead.
I remember the first time I talked to you. I called you once on the phone when I was working at LA Weekly, and you were at Caresen, because some guy had been calling, some guy was trying to pitch a story and was claiming he'd done all this CIA training in El Salvador, and I was trying to figure out if he was for real. And I called you, and you kind of laughed. And then we met in person 10 or 15 years later, probably around 2002 or 3, I would guess.
Yeah, in Echo Park.
Yeah.
Echo Park. Then a mutual friend had a birthday with me, and we had a joint celebration. And before I knew it, Ben had become a friend, and then a close friend, and then a dear friend, and then just a friend for life.
And if I remember correctly, the LAPD helicopters also attended that birthday party.
That's a Salvadoran party for you, man.
Yeah.
We bring the true blue everywhere we go, man.
Well, I want to take this opportunity. These last few months have been so strange, and we've managed to talk to each other a little bit here and there, and even see each other. But I don't think I've had a chance in private to tell you how terrific I think your book is, and how both as a as a brave piece of nonfiction and as just as a piece of writing. And how cool it's been as your friend who, when I first met you, I knew you as an organizer, as an activist, as a deeply politically committed person. And then slowly over these years, I've gotten to watch you decided at one point you were going to become a writer. And then in the way you do things, you just did it. And first we're writing for newspapers, for magazines, and then told me you were going to write a book, and now the book is out and we get to celebrate it. I'm thrilled to be able to do that with you. But a good place to start would be, why on earth, having been a financially solvent and relatively happy person, did you make this incredibly self-destructive decision to become a writer?
Well, I was with you up until you said financially solvent, at which point you started delving off into mythology, Ben. But thank you.
Well, you put up a good front anyway.
Thank you for the kind words. No, I want to thank Alta and David Hewlin and all the crew at Alta for putting this together, Beth. And obviously you, Ben, for the years of friendship. And I mean, what got me to write this book now, it's not just now. And, the PR of it, the public relations component is just sprung out of my head like Athena, fresh from the head of Zeus, right? But that's not really how it is. I've been in love with the word since I was a kid, since I grew up in a household with a father who, when he wasn't running guns and contraband to El Salvador, was quoting Spanish and Latin American poets and playing a lot of different kinds of Latin American music, much of which had some just gorgeous lyrics with all those O's and A's in them. And a mother who was a union activist, and when she wasn't managing this massive migrant household, would, sing boleros like Cucurucucu Paloma. And you just listen to that. That's one of my earliest memories is Cucurucucu Paloma. And so I grew up with music and lyricism my entire life. And I always loved the word, and I was a closet. I think when I was a kid, I was kind of going into the thug life, for example. I was a closet thinker. I was in the closet. I couldn't come out to my friends. And so yeah, it's always been there. And then I've been keeping notebooks my entire adult life. And one day I just said, fuck, I'm gonna finally write something. And the moment is what spoke to me, because we're in this epic moment that your book talks about, where we're facing just these astonishing crises, the likes of which humanity's never seen in its 300,000 year kind of or so history and whatnot. So, and it's documented and all that. So I thought I wanted to, I'm Salvadoran, so we as a people have been through our own version of the epic crisis that preceded the current crisis. So I thought I would share the blueprints for the consciousness that got me through. And that kind of leads me to kind of segue into just recognizing you for your support, Ben. If you look at my acknowledgements, everybody, you'll see Ben is near the top with the Council of Consiglieres that includes Carolina Gonzalez, Monica Novoa, Barbara Renault Gonzalez, and a few other people, and Ben Ehrenreich. So you were there for me, along with a lot of other people that made my writing possible. And I just want to point out to people, the beauty of Ben writings has a lot of precedence, in not just in the book, but in previous writing, like the one in which he was led by his convictions to, go to Palestine and to have the audacity to ascribe humanity to Palestinians. I mean, what the fuck is that? That's, you did this knowing full well that you would face the deadly wrath of Terry Gross, who would ignore you along with all of NPR. On all seriousness, that book, Way to Spring, is a gorgeous book that is not recognized because of the political, kind of like the political environment that we live in, that doesn't go beyond like a Biden Harris, Obama, Democrat kind of ideology. And so given that in context, Ben, I want to know what led you not just to write your book, but to do it in the way that you did it. Because I think the structure and the style with which we write communicates as much as the actual content.
Mm-hmm. You mean Desert Notebooks, not the Way to the Spring,
Desert
or
Notebooks,
both?
yeah. Not Way to the Spring.
You know, actually, some of it was conversations actually that you and I had after The Way to the Spring came out, because Roberto actually helped me enormously in sort of midwifing The Way to the Spring out into the world and trying to figure out, using his many years of experience as an activist to help me to figure out how to get this book about something that a lot of America did not want to hear about into people's hands and people's hearts. And it was some of our conversations afterwards that kind of freed me up to do the kind of thinking that went into Desert Notebooks. And it sounds a little funny to say this, but I mean, this book really took me over like a bit of a fever, which I think is, you know, often the best way and the craziest way to experience a project like this. But I started writing it thinking that I was writing a journal entry before sitting down to work on the novel I was writing. And I haven't touched that novel since, and I just kept writing for basically a year. And the book, I hope, captures some of the urgency of the obsessions that pushed along my investigations. And it took the shape it did, I think, partly because, you know, among other things, it's an investigation of time and why we think about time the way we do, and why time currently feels so out of joint. And it became, through that, I think, more thoroughgoing critique of some of our dominant notions of time, especially to the degree that they're guided by the notion of progress. And to the extent that that was true, I couldn't write a normally structured book. I couldn't write a book that had a linear narrative that unfolds towards an end, that is in sight, and that has a very, you know, sort of teleological unfolding structure. So it was important to me, as I wrote it, that it tracks some of the more circuitous and sort of fortuitous shapes that I think time takes, and that it sort of actually allow the reader to experience that as the book itself unrolled, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, perfect sense.
But, you know, maybe I'll ask you, you know, one of the things that I was trying to do with that book was to uncover some of the repressed histories that disappear as we imagine time to have this tidy narrative shape, right? As narrative sort of cuts a single swathe through the you know, the chaotic fields of history, we leave a lot out. And those things tend to come back to haunt us. And I think we can certainly, you know, we can talk about this more, but climate change certainly feels to me like one of those hauntings. A lot of the stuff that we left out is now biting us in the ass. But this is also like, this is very, very much the subject of Unforgetting. It's in the title too. That, you know, this is a book in which you literally spend time with the bones, digging up the bones of El Salvador's dead, and the United States is dead. You talk in it about truth as uncovering, as unforgetting, and you referred to the Greek notion of aletheia, you know, which is literally an unconcealing or uncovering, and one of the Greek words for truth. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that guided this project, and generally your sense of what a writer does, you know, what a writer should be doing when they're sitting down at the, you know, with the page.
Wow, well, you've set me on the path of the writer to pursue the impossible. And I'm not going to be able to answer your fucking questions, but let me try. I chose the title after having written most of it and looking at like, okay, I've been on this journey across 30 years on a personal basis, and then like on my own story, and then the story of El Salvador in the United States, which goes back almost 90 years in terms of foreign policy and support for military dictatorships. And so I've been traversing in the book a landscape of 2,500 miles, 30 years of mass grave sites, war, gang violence, narco violence, US-sponsored death squads that pursued friends of mine and pursued me, and police violence that I saw in Los Angeles, see in San Francisco, and that lives to this day, and all the intersection between them, right? We don't talk about the intersectionality of policing and militarism, right? So I do, and I like, I decided, I realized, shit, I've been in this underworlds, like the underworlds of the mass grave sites, the underworlds of the guerrilla organization that I joined, the underworld of my family secrets, the underworld of migrant life that I had access to through my family and through all my work, and gang life, and the underworld of gangs. And so when it came down to it, I remember this concept that I read first in studying right-wing fascist theology as an evangelical Christian, right? I was in Bible school and learning about the Bible, and they shared this idea of aletheia, which comes from the Greek, which means
when you said right-wing fascist theology, I thought you were going to say Heidegger for a second, but
well, Heidegger's in there. Actually, I'll get to that in a moment. But as a Christian, I was exposed to this idea that for Christians means truth, not just right-wing, but also liberation theologians like John Sobrino and others that I met in El Salvador. And eventually in college, I left the church eventually, and I kind of became conscious of things. I started taking German philosophy classes, and this teacher, this really hardcore, brilliant woman, I can't remember her name at this moment, but she taught us about aletheia, but she brought in Hannah Arendt's idea, which was which ripping off your friend Heidegger, Ben. Arendt excavated this Greek ideal of the underworld journey in search for the forgotten truth, and applied it to the analysis of fascism and the way that fascism is enabled by amnesia and forgetting. And so the act of unforgetting I saw as a political act. And so given what I went through and saw, and the way I wanted to tell my story by, like yours, not having a linear, but a braided narrative, Unforgetting just fit it perfectly, because I was excavating the heart of Salvadoran and United States darkness, the heart of our lives lost in the darkness of Salvadoran and United States nationhood, because nations are built upon killing and forgetting killing, right? So, yeah. I want to, one of the things I want to do is go beyond, like, I mean, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but you kind of get bored of talking about your book, after a while. I don't know if that happens to you.
I feel like I don't know about bored, but I could talk about other stuff.
Yeah, let me rephrase. I don't get bored because I love what I did and I love what I'm doing, but I'm also like, want to throw down with the current moment of what's going on and what so, I mean, it feels like, in Desert Notebooks, and I know in your thought there's an unnamed crisis murmuring there between the lines. Am I right? I mean, is there something there that you want the reader to come to on their own that you don't name?
I feel like you're fishing for something, but I'm not sure if my answer is going to be.
What do we got to do about the climate crisis? That's not the climate crisis.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that it's actually pretty explicit in the book as the book goes on is that really in the late 18th and the early 19th century, which is when it's in the 19th century that we begin to emit carbon into the atmosphere, and to the degree that it's actually been changing the climate of the Earth. We were also seeing the beginnings of a entirely different way of relating to one another, to the planet, to resources, et cetera, which we would these days call capitalism, right? And I think it's pretty hard to ignore that parallel, that human beings have been living on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years and not destroying their environment, perhaps, certainly leaving dents in the various ecosystems, but not, threatening our entire ability to subsist on the planet until this certain point, right? And this certain point happened to come at precisely the same time that a new economic form was really blossoming, if that's the right word. And in the century and a half since then, we've entered a mass extinction. We have destroyed enormous parts of the earth and the oceans, et cetera, et cetera. And this can kind of only be related, I think, to this economic system that takes everything as an input. All of creation become resources for investment. And everything is eaten for this eternal growth machine. And I think even today it's extremely hard to talk about this without people thinking you're crazy if you call into question the notion of eternal growth, which is a blatantly theological notion. Like things do not grow forever. You can't just keep eating everything on the planet forever and not expect it to have some consequences. So yeah, I mean, I think the bigger crisis is not the crisis simply of how much carbon we're emitting, but how we relate to one another, to our own labor, and to the planet itself. And that's a bigger social and economic crisis, which is going to require, I think, more radical and more imaginative solutions than most people are coming up with. But do we have time for let's see, we're coming close to the point where we should stop and go to questions, but maybe I can ask you one more before we go to the audience's questions, which is, so as not to leave everyone with the destruction of the planet. I mean, you're somebody that, like, no matter how bad things look, you're somebody I always come to who I know is going to be able to find some strategic opening that suggests that things are not that bad, that in fact, things are actually looking kind of good. So what right now, we've had a change in the administration, but there's still crisis upon crisis upon crisis. You're in California, where the deaths have been absolutely out of hand. That's true in much of the country and much of the world. There are crises of fascism, crises of the climate on top of the pandemic. Where do you right now look to see openings that might get us out of this mess?
I'm looking at a lot of Netflix and Amazon right now to keep. No. Had you asked me this in the last 3 weeks up until yesterday, I would have not had an answer like what I have now, because I've been pretty down and having some difficulties with multiple things in my life, not least of which was a couple of family friends who were afflicted with COVID. And these things combined to bring me down for a couple of weeks. And I've been pretty sleepless for more than probably 3 weeks. And, the mood shifts and everything, and the tendency for those dark things below levels of awareness to come up has been very present with me. And I've had to really try to keep the ship afloat. But lo and behold, I had a good night's rest last night, and I can hear the muses and see the graces of my ferocity again, the ferocity I inherited from my mother primarily, Maria Elena Lovato, a Salvadoran woman who's lived through epic things in a military dictatorship and then raising a family in many ways by herself. So right now, I take, you always have to go to the young people, any revolutionary movement, the levelers, you know, revolutions in Africa and the global South. I've always had young people. And I think the national security operatives that I've interviewed and fought against and whose ideas literally fought against know that the key to the future of either domination for them or emancipation for us lies in the political imagination. The imagination, like if you read General Giap, the general that kicked the shit out of not just the French or the British, but the United States, you know, the greatest military strategist of all time, who trained some friends of mine who I would ask when, you know, when I had a chance to ask them. I said, hey man, so what's the Jedi knowledge of revolution? And my friend, you know, he's this bookish looking dude. You'd never know. He has 50 times more experience, having 16 years of civil war as a commander in the Frente. Says, well, it's that war is primarily psychological, spiritual, or we would call in this context psychological. So that the spiritual animus is what defeated the U.S. So we as writers right now, I think, have a mission to help people break the piggyback of their political imaginations right now. We have, and I see your work doing that in the way that you take risks. You go to Palestine, you get on a fucking boat in the Mediterranean with these African refugees. You go, you know, to El Salvador, you go places where your convictions take you, and then you write beautifully about it. I think that's an example of the kind of poet warriorship that I draw a lot of hope for. And it's a part of my next book, which is tentatively called Letters to a Young Poet Warrior. So that's kind of in young people and in the power of the word to still disorganize people's senses away from the neo-fascistic ideologies of Democrat and Republican alike. Mm-hmm. By the way, I noticed, Ben, that you talked about capitalism as blossoming. Man, I didn't realize.
Oh, it's a beautiful flower. Yeah.
I saw that and I exposed it for public consumption there on the chat. So.
Yeah.
And
a flower that never fades.
Hey, Ben, I want to ask you, what's your thing with Benjamin?
What's my thing with Benjamin?
Oh, Benjamin, yeah.
Oh, God.
Why do you love Benjamin so much?
Why do I love Benjamin so much? Because I'm a nerd. And he's sort of he's like one of the greatest nerd heroes, I think, of all time. Just this perfectly bookish man. I think he writes very beautifully. He writes very subtly. He had a very keen sense of crisis, and I think of what was at stake in the crisis that he was living through, which is still the crisis that we are living through. And I think through all of that, he was this sort of strange creature that frustrates everybody. Gershom Scholem wanted him to be a good Jew and a Zionist. Brecht wanted him to be a good Marxist. He kind of lets everybody down, and is far more interesting than any of them. But I think he had always brought a profound and forgive this word because it's not a great word. I think sort of spiritual sense of what was at stake in the political battles of the day, and also because his story is ultimately a tragic one. He killed himself. He didn't make it across the Pyrenees. I'm not the first person to tell his story, but I tell it in the book that he was trying to get out of Germany. He made it. Out of France, rather. He made it across the Pyrenees to Spain and was going to be turned back, and he overdosed on morphine to avoid being turned over to the Nazis. And he lost the will to keep fighting. And there's something in that failure of nerve that kind of makes his project feel unfinished. and makes me keep wanting to go back to it and just to see what he saw and wasn't what he wasn't able to push past.
This is a less pessimistic Ben than the one I met.
Wow.
I like this Ben. You're a lot less pessimistic than when I met you. And
You know,
I see it in your book and in your life now.
the more I get the shit kicked out of me, the less pessimistic I am in a weird way.
One of the things Beth wanted me to mention Dignidad Literaria, and I'll connect this to Ben and I because, you know, I came up with Dignidad Literaria, the campaign first before even American Dirt came out. I conceived of it to target the AWP, the Association of Writing Programs, for their complete disregard of Latino authors and publication. And and you can see an example in their upcoming conference. I have Ben, Michelle Garcia, a stellar, brilliant writer who's working on a book sure to be like a bestseller and super smart and adventurous. And I proposed this panel to AWP and it got rejected because there are these gatekeepers, including some Latinos, who are the gatekeepers of what is the literary, right? And you and I talk a lot about that, Ben. And we have to be very mindful of the notions of the literary, where you have like a Pulitzer Prize winning poet who when he was crying and, denouncing Trump about the caged children that I've been writing about for some time, way before 2018, when I mentioned to this prize winning poet that, hey, by the way, Barack Obama started us on this path in 2011. Go look at reports from the Lutheran Immigration Services and others, and you'll see that Obama started us on this path. What was the great poet's response? Delete me from his Twitter account. He blocked me. Yeah, this is the typical, and this wasn't a white poet. Okay, so we're at a time where the political imagination needs to be smashed and reconstituted. And that's why I love being on stuff with Ben, because Ben has no wits about that. He's
I have no wits whatsoever. Let me ask you before we go to the audience questions, one other thing, just to tie this back. I don't know how much the people who are watching this know about Dignidad Literaria. I assume a lot of them already do. But you did this really like super ballsy thing, which was, you're a first-time author, you had a book coming out, and you took on this full frontal assault of the publishing industry for its racism, like really just calling it out, calling people out. And I wonder if you could tie that project to the project of Unforgetting and Aletheia that you take on in your actual writing.
Yeah, I thank you, Ben. It wasn't as courageous as you would think, because I'm a calculating sort. I'm a strategist. I was a strategist in a previous life, different setting. So, I mapped out the terrain, and I knew that I'm a fucking bald leftist writer coming out as having been an urban commando and involved in the exposure of Barack Obama's neo-fascistic policies and treatment and practices on Central American children who he caged, separated, and even killed. So I'm publicly out there about that. So I was doomed from the beginning. My literary life was kind of like Benjamin, man. I was doomed from the get. But I did it anyway because of the injustice. And I said I had nothing to lose. And I guess that's the beauty of the political moment right now, where, a lot of us as writers and as human beings in the capitalist system, we have shit to lose at this point, and we have everything to gain from, again, smashing the piggyback of our political imaginations and taking on the system in ways that we can't even imagine, which is where, I draw hope, because there are things that are going to happen, acts of imagination, of collective imagination, that we're going to be pushed to, just the way we were pushed during the years of military dictatorship in El Salvador, that people in the United States and around the world haven't seen yet. We haven't seen what we're capable of. We can document the destruction. We can even mathematically measure it with climate change, right? Increasingly. But we're not as good as mapping out the interstitial linkages of hope and real hope, true hope, and courage and brilliance that the human race is capable of. And that excites me a fuckload.
Mhm. Mhm. I just imagine there'll be plenty of opportunities for that coming up.
Well, on that note, things that excite Roberto Lovato a fuckload, I will rejoin, and I've got some questions from the audience. I think just kind of scaling down, Alejandro asks, can you comment how far American lit needs to go to meet the magnitude of crises facing the US and the world? What would be necessary here in the United States, and maybe even specifically in the West, because I know that there's a big difference between the Western literary community and that in New York and the East, to have American literature that truly meets the moment?
Ben, I'll let you get that first.
I mean, I'm thinking about this a little bit in the context of Amitav Ghosh's wonderful book, which everybody should read if they haven't, The Age of Derangement, which is about the failure of literature, and he's talking about world literature, to deal at all with the largest crisis facing humanity at this moment and perhaps at any time, which is the climate crisis. And he certainly talks about this, but I think, you know, one of the things that has really crippled American literature for decades now is this very strange and I think parochial insistence that literature and politics are different things and have to remain different things. That if literature is too political, then it becomes activism, or it becomes dogmatic or didactic or something else, and it's not literature anymore. And this, you know, flies in the face of what most literature is doing in most of the world for the last couple of centuries. And I think comes out very specifically out of a Cold War context in which, and I'm not being conspiratorial, this is well documented, the CIA was actually, you know, right there at the Paris Review and at the Iowa Writers Program and things like that, and helping to craft a sense of the literary, which specifically excluded collective notions and political notions and political critique. I think it's really clear that that doesn't work anymore, if it ever did, and and I think we're seeing more and more writers unable to avoid the crises of the moment and unable to avoid politics. And I find that encouraging. It's too bad that we had to reach such dire straits to hit that moment, but we'll take it. Roberto, what do you think?
Yeah, you took all my lines, bro, but yeah, I agree. I think that's what I'm dedicating my next book, the next several months to, is to kind of pipe in Latin American thought from the South, the global South, where I think we need to draw a lot of our inspiration. There's not a lot that inspires me here in the United States. A lot of the race talk is tied to the Democratic Party. And, you know, you have like this thing where kind of Latinos and Asian Pacific Islanders don't fucking matter, right? They're like people of color in this BIPOC thing, where like, okay, great, Black people, indigenous people have recognition, but everybody else is a person of color, which seems to be a little bit scary, to be honest, because we all have identities and realities. I fucking have seen, you know, some really awful things that Central Americans, for example, have seen. And to reduce that to a blob of anonymousness doesn't seem right. So, you know, I draw my inspiration from Latin American poetics and politics that inspired me to risk my life for a higher ideal. And I don't want to encourage people to risk their lives, but we do got to put a lot on the line right now and sacrifice to alter the course of this human race that is out of sync with the planet. And so, and I agree with you, like the CIA, people don't realize that the US state has had so much investment in shaping ideas of the literary. There's a book, and I'll share a link to it, Du Bois' Telegram, by Juliet Spar. Oh, no, that's not it. Somebody could find it, that'd be cool. I
can find it.
It talks about the way that the CIA would play a role in shaping literature that you described. I have sources in the CIA, and my sense of things is that they no longer need to do that when you have people like Lin-Manuel Miranda promoting right-wing statist ideology through his different works. For example, in promoting the colonization of Puerto Rico embodied by the Promesa Act, which was as destructive as Hurricane Maria, to the Puerto Rican condition. And so, I even view Ta-Nehisi Coates, quite frankly, in that context. I don't see emancipation in the approach that people like Coates or Lin-Manuel Miranda, who are closely tied to the Democratic Party, carne y uña y carne, are going to emancipate. We're not going to progressive liberal our way out of this. As you said, progress is a dangerous word. I don't call myself progressive. Progress is genocidal when you look at it from a historical perspective. So we need to reinvent. We all need to become poets and do what you and I try to do, which is to instill a poetic sensibility in our use of the word in prose. And I think we need to do that with our imagination generally. And there's still a role for words in that, in a world dominated by imagery.
I'm going to grab
one other great book, if I can say, Francis Stoner Saunders' book, the Cultural Cold War, on that CIA and culture and literature question. Sorry, Beth.
No. Well, I was just going to say that, as we run out of time, I am writing down these references, and anyone who's registered for this event will get an email this afternoon, and I'll have links to everything that we've discussed, as well as excerpts from both Ben and Roberto's books, links to where you can buy them and stuff like that. We're getting lots of questions now, of course, as we run out of time. Roberto, I think you just touched on this, but Christopher asks, as we're faced with so many crises, and that's coming up a ton, and it seems incredibly challenging for authors, for any kind of amplified voices, to find a way of speaking to this. But how do you both parse between the urgencies of your investigative journalism and political journalism with poetic literary work?
I don't know if this this speaks more to a failure to do so or not, but I've stopped writing fiction, and I hope one day I'll be able to go back to it. I'm just writing for the last 6 years or so. Have just been writing journalism essays, nonfiction, because the things feel pretty urgent and pressing right now. And this is not to say there isn't a great need for the kind of transcendence that that fiction can offer. I just don't feel like those parts of my own brain are working right now, and I hope they will again one day. But in some ways, I think the dichotomy might be false. I don't think there has to be a dichotomy between investigative journalism and poetic literary work. I think good journalism is journalism that also thinks hard about language and its own structures, and how to get into the heart of a reader.
Reaching the heart mind of the reader at a time when we're bombarded by what I call beautiful garbage, right? If you look at the imagery and all the things that are being streamed at you, if you're a political organizer, a strategist, you have to map out a terrain that's overrun with beautiful garbage. And it's hard to compete with beautiful garbage if you don't come up with some beautiful shit yourself. I think the same applies to literary and political work, where, you have to kind of like, I look at Ben's book and it's like, hey man, it's an appeal to the imagination that's different from what you're gonna see on NPR. I'm sorry to be beating up on NPR, but I have their own people who work for them telling me how much they suck. So, I really think we need a break with what passes for the literary and the poetic and the political, and they're all mashed together. And we have to, the opportunity and chaos, right? Because, remember, the gods of Greece and of the Mayans all came from the abyss, from the great chaos below. The place where poetry comes from within the human race is where the science comes from. So we have to go back into the chaos to find the new language that will help us with the project of emancipation right now. And so the way I've kind of had this because of my folks, and I think, and my upbringing and being Salvadoran. And now I'm trying to conceptualize it and communicate it broadly, pipe it into the United States that is now resembling a Southern country, right? In the terms of the division between rich and poor. So we're going to have more radical thinking about these matters. And I just see an opportunity, man. You know, we're I grew up working class, so everything's a frontier. Everything's a way up. I'm Salvadoran. I've already seen the apocalypse. Ben and I have both in our books mentioned a brilliant theologian, Anathea Poitier Young, who wrote a book called Apocalypse Against Empire, which posits that what we call the apocalyptic literature of, in Judeo-Christian history is a response to just this epic crisis that there weren't going to be a way out. So they looked forward and created this idea of apocalypse to attack empire with. So, there's a lot of reason to be. You have no choice but to be hopeful at this stage of our game. To be hopeless is normal. That's what national security specialists do. I've interviewed them. That's exactly what they do. Is snuff out any notion, and that voice can be the voice of Dick Cheney, Donald Trump, or Barack Obama and Joe Biden, the voice of hopelessness. So find something else.
Amen.
Well, I mean, we're getting tons of questions, but we're also getting, thank you both so much. Keep coming up with that beautiful shit. Thank you guys. It's so much to think and act about. So yes, Mandy, there will be a recording of this event. And if you missed any portion of this event today, I'm going to download it as fast as I can and get it up on altaonline.com. I'm going to email everyone who's attended today a list of any links we've talked about. I've taken quick notes, and I'm going to do my best Googling to get you guys references to everything that Ben and Roberto spoke about today. If you're interested in joining us next Wednesday, we're going to take a 180 and discuss a true heartbreaking tragedy that took place on the Pacific Crest Trail in 2020, this past year. We're going to be joined by Alta contributor Louise Farr, who follows the story of 22-year-old Trevor Laher, an enthusiastic Pacific Crest Trail hiker who died just 8 days into his journey. And we're going to be joined by her and Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit volunteer Cameron Dickinson to talk about the Pacific Crest Trail, the culture surrounding it, and why it can be significantly more dangerous than it appears to be in movies. So please join us for that next Wednesday on February 3rd. Most importantly, on behalf of everyone at Alta, I am so grateful to Roberto and Ben for sharing their insight, their work with us in the magazine, and taking the time today. We are so very grateful, and it's been an important 45 minutes. And thank you both very, very much. And thanks to everyone for coming.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Beth and David and everyone at Alta. And thank you as always for the courage, the smarts, and the friendship.
You guys are great. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.